This week we're going to learn about functions in JavaScript, and I'm going to start by copying my week 3 folder and pasting in a new copy. And then I'm going to change the name to week 4. And so inside I have all of the stuff from last week, and I'm going to start with this register.html, which I used for my lab walkthrough video. So I'm going to go ahead and reload and then go to week 4, register. And let me go ahead and pop this open in Notepad++. So right now the code is mostly unstructured. So there are these two functions that I've defined already, and these are named functions because they include a name. And I've had to define these as functions because I wanted a convenient way of calling them when a particular event occurred. So here's an example of how to define a function. You have the keyword function, then the name. We're using lower camel case. It's called camel case because the capital letters are like the humps of a camel, and it's lower camel case because it starts with a lower letter. And then this thing here is a parameter list, which is a list of things that I can pass into the function from outside. Here, I'm not passing anything in, so the parameter list is empty. Then there's a curly brace, which marks the start of a block of statements. And at the end, there's a closing curly brace. And then inside, I have basically self-contained little world where anything that happens inside the function stays inside the function unless I explicitly pass it out or take some other action that changes the state of the world outside of this function. So I can have variables inside of here that live while I'm inside the function and go away when I leave the function. I can do whatever calculations I want. Everything is only inside this function unless I pass something out of it or take some other action that changes the world. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor this a little bit more because one of the things I've noticed about the code is that I have some code that's similar in my username validation and in my password validation. And anytime you have common code across more than one function, that should set off a flag in your brain that you might want to create a subfunction. And then the other reason I would want to create other functions here is that this code is particularly complex. So if you look at validate password, it's really doing many things. It's checking the length of the password, and it's setting a value of a message parameter, and it's checking the content of the password to make sure that it has an uppercase character and a number and a special character. So that's really a lot of stuff for one function. What you want to do in general is each function should be responsible for doing one thing. And that's the way you create functions that are easy to understand and maintain and reuse. If you have specific functions that do one thing, then anytime you need that thing later on, you can reuse the function. On the other hand, what you have here with this big, we call this a monolithic block of code, is you have a piece of code that's doing a lot of different things, and it's really hard to reuse later on unless you have a program that needs exactly this code. So let's start to refactor it. And first thing I'm going to do is create a function that sets the message. And basically, this line of code here is what's setting the message, but it also requires this line of code here that finds the message box. And so what I'm going to do is I'm going to start with function set message, and I'm going to pass in two things. I'm going to pass in the ID of the element that I want to set, and I'm also going to pass in the message that I want to set the value to. So we'll include an ID and also a message. And there's my function. And then inside of the function, the first thing I want to do for now is I want to call this getElementById and pass in whatever ID was passed in as a parameter. So message is document.getElementById, ID, and then message.innerText is equal to message. So a fairly simple function. And I'm going to go ahead and reuse that. So I don't need this line of code anymore. What I need is just that value, the ID. So I'm copying that. And I'm going to get rid of message entirely. And then here, I'm going to call setMessage, pass in the ID, and that piece of text. So that's what my calls are going to look like. And then here, I'm going to do the same thing. And then I'm also setting the message here. And that's it for this function. Now in this function, I'm setting a different message box, but since I made this thing be a parameter, it's pretty easy to reuse this function because the function is general. So I'm going to replace that, and then the ID of this box is password message. And then close that off. And then I don't need this anymore. So let's go ahead and do that with the other messages in this function. So that one. And here. And this one as well. And one more. Okay, and since this is spanning multiple lines, I'm going to indent it. Oh, actually, this isn't spanning multiple lines. It just got wrapped. So let me go ahead and wrap that line and tab this over so that it's clear that this is connected to the line above. And let me do the same thing here. So this is kind of a long piece of text. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to break that into two pieces of text and then add that part so that it's wrapped. And that looks like a reasonable length. So let's go ahead and test this. I'm going to go ahead and go to my week 4 register.html. And it's not working correctly, so I'm getting a default object HTML span element. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to hit F12 to get in the debugger. And I have a little error here. I forgot a reference to message.innerText. So let's fix that first thing. So I'm going to find message dot. And I missed that one, so let's go ahead and fix it. And we'll save, and then I'll go back to the browser and reload. Good. Okay, so that's gone away. I don't see any other errors right now. So in order to figure out why I'm getting this object HTML span element, I'm going to go ahead and put a breakpoint right here where I'm setting message.innerText. So I click right next to line 11, and then I'm going to hit reload. Okay, so I'm at my breakpoint. And if I look at the value of message, it's a span username message. Oh, so that's actually, the problem is I'm passing in a parameter called message, but then I'm also getting a div box named message. So I've shadowed my parameter. That's what it's called when you have a parameter name and you create a local variable that takes precedence over this parameter. So what I need to do is call this something different. So let's go back to the code, and that should be message box, and we'll make this message box and save. And then back here, I'll remove the breakpoint and continue, and then I'm going to reload. Good, so now I'm getting the message that character dot is invalid in the username. Let's go ahead and fix that. @ is invalid in the username. Dot is invalid in the username. So that's a valid username. And then I'm going to go ahead and delete everything. Username must be one or more alphanumeric characters. Test me. And then we'll start with the password. I'll just type some random stuff until I get up to 8 characters. So it must be at least one uppercase character, must be at least one number, and at least one character from the funny list. Good. So everything seems to be working the same. And I've pulled that functionality into a separate function. Now this is doing exactly one thing, and the advantage is that this is a little bit easier to read than the code that I had before, because I can see right here it's just setting the message and an ID box and piece of text. And then let's go ahead and refactor this thing as well. So this piece of code is fairly complicated. Let's actually break that up into multiple functions. And then what these functions are going to do is they're actually going to test to see whether character is lowercase and whether the character is uppercase and whether the character is a digit. And they're going to return true if that condition is true and false otherwise. So we'll start with the first one. So here's a piece of code that checks whether character is lower. And I'm going to define a function is lower, and it's going to take a character, and I'm going to return a value, which is whatever this Boolean value is. And then I'm going to do the same thing for is upper. And then I'm also going to do the same thing for is digit. There. So now that I have those functions, I can change this code to if not is lower character and not is upper character and not is digit character. If all of these things is true, then it's an invalid character in the username. So let's go ahead and save that and test it. So dot is invalid in username. @ invalid. Get rid of that dot. So this is all valid. And then let's go ahead and capitalize some of these. This should still work. And number should work as well. So everything looks good here. Now I could leave it like this, but what I'm going to do is I'm going to refactor this as well, because this is a little complicated. So I'm going to cut that, and I'm going to say if not is valid username character. And then I'm going to define that function. Like so. So once again, I'm refactoring a fairly small amount of code, but in doing so, I've given it a name that should be more explanatory than what I had before. So now let's look at what we have. So it's going to get the value from the form, and let's go ahead and call get input value, and I'm going to pass in the ID. So let's go ahead and fix that. So here's the code, and then this is going to be an ID, and then here I'm going to pass in username, and then I'm going to return it. So now value is get input value username. If value is empty, then set message, else clear message. And then for counter is 0, counter less than value, counter plus plus, gets the next character. If it's not valid, sets the error message. So that's a little clearer logically. Let's go ahead and make sure I haven't broken anything. So U is invalid in the username D, so I have broken something. So let's go ahead and fix that. Oh, I'm missing a semicolon here as well. Let me just save and reload. Okay. So I think I probably broke is valid username. So return, oh, that's not valid. So there we go. So this is what it means to be a valid username character. This is true, or that is true, or that is true. And then here in the check, if not valid. Okay, so let's go ahead and try it now. Actually, reload. Oh, save. Reload. Good. So now it's back to working. Great. Everything's fine. And then validate password, I can do the same thing. So here I'm going to call get input value password. And then that's fine. That's fine. So I'm getting characters. This is upper. And this is digit. And this is another one that I want. So I'm going to copy this. Actually, cut it. Let's cut that and call it is special. And then put that up with the other character checks is special. Like so. All right, so this is tracking all the flags and then checking all the flags. So let's go ahead and save that. Reload. And then here, password must be at least 8 characters. Test, test, so 8 characters. And I'm actually getting an error in here. So let's look at the error. Console. Character is not defined, so I misspelled something. Character. So let's fix that. character. So we'll save that. Okay, so 8 characters, at least one uppercase, at least one number, and at least one special character. Good. So that's all working the same. Now, this is still kind of a lot of code, so let's go ahead and break this into multiple parts as well. So this is going to be the part that validates the length. So let's go ahead and call this validate length value. And we'll function validate length value, and then we'll paste in all that code like so. So if it's empty, I get one message, otherwise I clear the message, and if it's less than 8, I set a message. So let's actually move this out of here too, and let's call that ClearMessage. ClearMessage. And we'll get rid of that else and just call setMessage here. Okay, so this function isn't returning anything, it's causing what's called a side effect. So when this is changing the world outside of this function, that's called a side effect. And now ClearMessage, validate length, and then this could be refactored into something that checks requirements, and then this could be refactored into something that displays message. But to really do this right, I need to know a little more about objects or arrays, so I'm just going to leave this like this for now. What I'm going to do, I'm just going to move the whole thing into check requirements. Actually, let's make it password requirements. Okay. So there's check password requirements, and we'll save that. And then we can do the same thing here in validate username. So let's go ahead and I'm just going to move this whole thing. So I'll move this into, I already have a clear message, don't I? Yeah, let's go ahead. What I'm going to do here is call clear message and pass in password message. And then in my clear message, I'm going to take an ID and then use that ID. And then I'm going to move this into the same place as where I define set message because it's related. And then here I'm going to call ClearMessage username message, and we'll move that to the top here. get rid of this else, and then move this into a new function called check username requirements, like so. And then call that. Like so. Okay, so to validate the username, I get the input value for username. I clear the username message, and then I check username requirements of the value. And then to do that, I check to see whether it's empty, set a message, and then I loop through each character one at a time. If it's not a valid username character, then I write the message character whatever is invalid in the username. So that's pretty understandable. And then each of these helper functions is just doing one thing, so it's pretty easy to read. And this is a little long, but I'm going to leave it for now. Might revisit it later. So let's go ahead and save it and do one more test. And these should both work now. So let's go ahead and blank it out. And then I'm going to type mark space is invalid. Uppercase worked. So that's fine. And we'll add a number that works fine. And then let's go ahead and change the password. I'm going to inspect this element, and I'm going to change the type from password to text so you can see what I'm typing. And then let's start typing. Password is 8 characters. Oh, and I am getting an error message here, so let's fix that. Has upper is not defined, so I must, it should be is upper. Oh, actually, I needed to move these local variable declarations into here. There. Oh, this should not be inside of the loop because it gets cleared each time through. It should be here at the top. So I'm declaring them at the top and setting them to false, and then I have my loop. So reload, and then I'm going to clear this, and I'm also going to clear that, and then right-click, inspect, set the type to text so I can see the contents, and then I'll start typing. So marc space, user character space is invalid. So goodman, and we'll try some numbers. So that all works. And then at least one uppercase letter, P, at least one number, ASSW0RD, at least one character from that list. So let's go ahead and change this to an @. Must be at least 8 characters RD. So that all looks like it's working correctly.